In part 1, I talked about why I was considering switching over to a Sony phone. Here in part 2, I'll talk about more details on the Xperia 5 II. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, I'll include a link to that video. Just a quick recap from part 1. Two interesting features I listed were headphone jacks and a rectangular screen without any notches or hole punches. But how about the other features of this phone? Feel free to pause the video at any time because there's a lot of info coming up. Other features that I was looking for that may or may not be common among other phones include being waterproof, having a battery that lasts for at least a day, performs well with videos and games, has USB mass storage mode, micro SD expansion slot, and this allows you to have your files separate from the main partition, Miracast, Chromecast, 1080p 120 frames per second video recording, or even 240 frames per second if the hardware and software allows for that. This will allow for some great B-roll shots if I'm doing a video. Focus peaking, optical stabilization, dual SIM slots, NFC, wireless charging, having split screen so you can display two apps simultaneously, and having the lens centered in the back of the phone. For the video, I have mentioned 1080p, but not 4K or 8K, even though some of the competitions include that. Why? I personally think that companies are pushing 4K way too hard, and maybe people aren't really taking full advantage of 4K. And let me explain that. When you're watching TV in your living room, let's say you have a 65-inch TV. If you buy a TV today, it's most likely going to be 4K, right? Now you're taking that kind of resolution where you can watch TV up close, like literally inches away, and still see things clearly. You're cramming that into a little phone screen, and yeah, you're closer to the phone, but do you really need all those pixels? When you add more pixels to process, you need more processing power. So now you're using more power, you're using more CPU, depending on the application, but are you really taking advantage of that? For example, in my home theater, I have a projector that does 1080p, and no one complained about the resolution when I brought friends over. Maybe they're trying to be nice, but I haven't heard anything about resolution, and the screen that I'm projecting on is a 120-inch screen, so that compared to a 65-inch or a 6.5-inch screen on the phone, I think it's kind of a waste to force 4K onto a mobile device, and that's one of the reasons why I skipped the Xperia 1 II. Now let's dive right into the pros and cons. Starting with the pros, in terms of the basics, the phone worked flawlessly. I was able to boot the phone, plug in the SIM card, and I was able to call and text right away. When I logged into my Google account, I was able to download my contacts right away, so I didn't lose any of the contacts that I had. The display is nice and sharp. It's bright enough that I can clearly see things outside, even under bright sunlight. The colors look great, it's vibrant, the black levels are nice, and it's also rectangular. There are no notches or punch holes to interrupt the flow in a notification bar, which is something that I really appreciate from the design. I'd take bezels any day if I can get a rectangular screen. Since the phone is a bit taller, some complain that it makes it harder to access the notification bar if you're using one hand, but personally, I've never seen this as a problem. Stereo speakers come standard with the phone instead of just mono, but the sound quality is just decent. More on that on the cons section. In terms of the stereo speakers themselves, I can really hear the difference between the left and right channels when I have the phone horizontal. When I watch videos, they're pretty much always smooth, so no problems there. When it comes to the keyboard itself, by default, the number row is hidden, and for me, I don't like this. Luckily, you can change it so that you can show the number row at all times. I've also used swipe, which works very well. Similar to the iPhone, you can swipe the spacebar to move your cursor, which is pretty nifty as well. The operation itself isn't exactly like the iPhone. Instead of needing to hold down the spacebar first, you can start swiping the spacebar right away and immediately change the position of the cursor. MMS over Wi-Fi. Yeah, call me weird. To save data, I'm on Wi-Fi a lot, and I turn off the mobile data most of the time so that if I'm leaving the house, it doesn't sync until I move on to the next Wi-Fi hotspot that I'm connected to. If I'm using mobile data, most of the time I'm just doing something really quick, and I turn it on, do my thing, and then turn it back off when I'm done. So while I can save data with its approach, the problem is that when I turn off mobile data, I can't receive any MMS messages until I re-enable it. So when it comes to group chats, I see a little notification saying that an MMS message is ready to be downloaded, but it doesn't download until I activate the mobile data. Now with these newer phones, I can download those messages over Wi-Fi and I won't need to worry about enabling mobile data. That's a nice convenience there. And I guess this feature would come in handy if you're in an area with poor cellular connection. If you're the type of person that utilizes multiple accounts and guest mode, this is available on the Sony Xperia 5 II. I never saw this on my old Samsung phones, but I've heard that Samsung and other manufacturers disable this feature on their phones for some reason. If you do enable this, you can access it once it's granted from a privileged account, such as your main user account on your phone. So, if I were to lock the phone, someone else wouldn't just be able to launch guest mode without having me logging in first and then enabling the guest session. The battery care feature comes with the phone and allows you to extend the lifetime of your battery. It does this by charging your phone overnight and topping out at 90%. Then, it charges your phone up to the full 100% right before you wake up. You can select a custom schedule for this feature to kick in. Now, whether it actually extends the lifetime of your battery or not, I don't know. In my opinion, when it comes to something as critical as battery charging and management of power, I'd rather have the manufacturer include this as part of the software load on the phone rather than downloading a generic third-party app and then hoping it will work with your specific phone. I don't know, maybe I'm more on the cautious side. I was originally concerned about the heat buildup from fast charging because either way, whether this feature is on or off, fast charging is not disabled. And for me, the concern around the heat buildup is that it might shorten the battery life, but from what I've read in recent articles, this does not affect the battery long term. I have no issues using casting. Mirrorcast allows me to stream my whole screen, like a browser, directly to my smart TV. On the other hand, if you're using the YouTube app, you can use the Chromecast feature to cast onto the TV's YouTube app. I did buy a USB Type-C to a USB Type-A adapter for the charger, but this can also double up as an adapter for USB devices for your phone. The USB on-the-go feature can be used to connect a wireless keyboard or a trackpad for your presentations, if that's something you do. You can also use something like a USB-C micro SD memory card adapter in case you want to review footage from, let's say, a dash cam while you're on the road. Now over to the cons. In terms of the screen, I did mention in the Pro section that it's an excellent screen, and it is. I really like it. The problem with the screen that I have with this phone is that I feel like it overcompensates when you bring it into a dark room. So when you bring a phone into a darker room, it's supposed to dim the screen, and then when you bring the phone into a brighter room or outside, it's supposed to raise the brightness to compensate. But I feel like when the phone is brought into a darker area, it makes the screen too dim to the point where I have to adjust the brightness. And this phone has the adaptive brightness feature where it will learn the behavior of the user and then match their preferences. But I don't feel like it did a good job with that because I still find myself having to increase the brightness when I go to a dark room with this phone. The micro SD card takes place of the second SIM card slot. You can use a second SIM card or a micro SD card, but not both. I was hoping you can use all three since my wife and I are planning to travel more in the future, so if we were to go to a different country and pick up a SIM card, I would like to take advantage of that in addition to being able to use a micro SD card in the phone, and at the same time not requiring to remove my original SIM card. The reason why I like to have a micro SD card is because I can store my photo, video, and music files separately from the main partition. Previously, I mentioned that having stereo speakers are nice, but the tone isn't as good as my wife's iPhone XR. On the iPhone XR, you get a little bit more bass, but in addition to this, compared to my old S8 Plus, the S8 Plus has a little bit more clarity in the higher frequency sounds compared to the Xperia 5 II. You can enable Dolby Atmos, and this will bump up the sound quality in my opinion, but Dolby Atmos isn't what you think it is. It's not referring to any height speakers, obviously. This feature allows you to tune the equalizer settings and can restore some of the missing bass and treble. I also noticed that the back of the phone tend to vibrate even at medium volume levels. Turn it up to the max and the exterior of the phone definitely vibrates. Speaking of vibrations, I left the dynamic vibration feature off. This feature allows the phone to pulse along with the beat of the audio that's currently played, but I think this is kind of gimmicky and distracting. All the physical buttons are located on the right side of the phone. Starting from the top, we have the volume up and down, followed by the power button, then the virtual assistant button, and then finally the camera button. If I had to critique this, I would say that the volume button should be moved to the left so that the layout can be more balanced out. Numbered badges. This is an odd one. The default Xperia launcher does not seem to display the numbered badges for new notifications. For example, if you get 3 new text messages on a Samsung phone or an iPhone, you'll see a small number 3 next to the texting app. The notification style that comes out of the box is just a dot. So you'll see that you have new messages, but you can't tell how many new messages there are. To help fix this, I installed the Microsoft launcher, and that has allowed me to enable the numbered badges. It has also allowed me to do additional customization, such as increasing the number of app icons shown per screen. I've played around with the Nova launcher, but the number of badges feature specifically required the purchased version of it, and I didn't feel like paying for it. Also, from within the Android Messages app, it doesn't tell you the number of unread messages per thread. It just bolds the previews for the new messages. On Samsung phones, at least the ones that I've had, you'll get a count of unread messages per thread. Speaking of SMS text messages, Samsung gives you the last read bookmark. I don't know if this is just a Samsung thing, but I didn't see this feature here on the Xperia 5 II. This places a bookmark line where you last read your text message. This comes in handy where if, let's say, you're in a group text message and you're getting a lot of messages in a row and you don't get a chance to look at it, this will show you where you last left off so you're not scrolling back to see where's the last message that you've read. When I did a Google search on this, I'm surprised that I didn't see a whole lot of this being discussed, so either I'm missing something or maybe this is something that not a whole lot of people are looking for, but I think this is quite a useful feature. If you guys ever use Slack, it's very similar to that. But since this is not a Sony specific messaging app, I can't really fault Sony for this. But come on, Google. Screenshots are hard to take. You'll need to push down the power button and the volume button together at exactly the same time. And I think the timing of this is even more sensitive than other Android phones that I've used. If you accidentally press one before the other, the screenshot wouldn't save. You also have the option of holding down the power button and then taking a screenshot from there, but if you're trying to take a screenshot at a very exact moment, this method wouldn't work because it would introduce too much delay. Surprisingly, there is no wireless charging capabilities with this phone. When I used it with the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus, wireless charging means that I can't use the phone freely while holding it and having it charged at the same time. It pretty much has to stay on the charging pad. I've also found out that I can interrupt the charging accidentally if I bump into it without knowing, so I can live without this feature. But at $950, I think Sony should have left this option in for those who want to take advantage of this feature. However, if you do want wireless charging and you want to stick with the Sony line of phones, you do have to bump up to the Xperia 1 II. Since we're talking about charging, the provided USB cord is a bit short in my opinion. For using this phone while lying down on a couch or bed, you might need something like 10 feet of cable if you want to be able to turn around without overstretching the cord. Traditionally, I think a short cable shouldn't be an issue if you're buying a premium phone, but I struggle with this point because on some phones, they no longer come with a charger, and this is to help eliminate some of the cost and waste. And not only that, a lot of people that are currently buying smartphones now previously owned a smartphone and they have a USB cord and they have a charger, and plus once you buy a USB-C cable, you can use it again for other devices or a future phone that you purchase. There are 3 different lenses in the back: a 16mm f2.2, a 24mm f1.7, and a 70mm f2.4. These are 35mm equivalent focal lengths. Oddly, on Sony's site, their specs list the front camera as being an f2 lens, but it doesn't specify a focal length. It says the lens has an 84-degree field of view, which puts this slightly wider than the standard lens in the back of the phone, which has an 82-degree field of view. One uncommon feature of this phone is that it has a shutter button. Not only that, it has a half press mode that acts like a real camera for focusing. So if you're into photography and you have this phone as a pocket camera, this comes in pretty useful. With the standard camera app, it's pretty standard. You can swipe left and right to switch between the still photo mode as well as the video recording modes. Swipe down to switch between the front and back cameras, and while using the back cameras, you can switch between one of the 3 available ones using the app. Within each camera, you can digitally zoom up to 3 times. With the telephoto lens, the light gathering ability isn't as good as the other 2, and you can tell this from the f-stop, so I'm guessing it'll have a little bit more noise compared to the other 2 because it has to raise the ISO to compensate, and you might have some of the noise reduction algorithms kicking in, and that in turn makes the photos a little bit more muddy. As a simple test of sharpness, I took a picture of this plant, and this is just lit by natural lighting from the window. We'll zoom into 100%, starting from the center and then move out towards the edges. So here's some of the pros of Photo Pro. It's free, it comes with a phone, there are no ads, no purchasing of additional features, so this is not a freemium app. Just like the regular camera app, you have the option to save images to a micro SD card. The controls are all laid out in front of you. True, the preview screen is smaller, but less menus to jump through means that you can make adjustments faster. Having full manual control and having 3 lenses allow for more creativity. Although certainly not unique to this phone, multiple lenses allow you to have an extra wide view or a medium telephoto view of your subject without needing to resort to digital zoom. Eye autofocus works pretty well, and this feature also tracks me even with glasses on. Eye autofocus is nice because when you're taking a picture of someone, normally you want to take a picture focusing on their eyes rather than something like their nose or their ears. The eye for a person's face, in most cases, is the most important part. Burst mode is nice, and those are organized together after the pictures have been taken. I took this out to get shots around town during Christmas. I took this photo later in the sunset, so I probably passed the best time to take the sunset photo, but my main purpose was to take photos at night since it's much more difficult than daytime. Take a look at these shots. Not bad. With manual controls, you can even drag the shutter. There wasn't a whole lot of traffic, so you'll see some tail-like streaks in the photos, but not a whole lot. This was from a 2-second exposure with a f2.2 aperture at ISO 50. The aperture is fixed and can't be changed. To test how well the handheld shots can be done at night, here is one with the ultra-wide lens. The first one is a 1/4 second long, and then the second one is a 1/3 second exposure. I don't know if all or some of the lenses have optical steady shot, but I think at least the standard and the telephoto lenses do have the optical image stabilization. I read somewhere that the ultra-wide lens doesn't have it. If you're an intermediate or an advanced photographer, you might want to experiment with RAW photos. RAW can be useful for recovering data that would have been lost in a compressed JPEG image. Take this photo as an example. It is underexposed. If I took the JPEG and try to fix it with color curves, you'll see a lot of color information being lost. However, processing the exposure adjustment from the RAW image can save a lot of the color information, and this is just one example. Please note, I normally like to shoot in 3:2 aspect ratio, so the JPEGs are pre-cropped from the actual sensor data when I take the photos, but the raw images themselves takes up the whole sensor, which is a 4:3 aspect ratio. So you'll see a little bit of difference in terms of the framing between the JPEGs and the raw images I've taken. Here are some of the cons of Photo Pro. When it comes to Photo Pro, I feel like there's a lot of software improvement opportunities that Sony can make that would tremendously enhance their product. The good news is that I believe a software update can be deployed to fix these, as opposed to something like a hardware issue where you can't fix it by a software update. Let's take a look further into these. First, there is no focus peaking. My old Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus has this, and it's so helpful when I'm trying to manually focus. This is especially useful if you have a smaller preview screen as well. So in Photo Pro, your preview screen isn't taking up the whole screen, so it's even harder to manually focus, especially without the focus peaking feature. And if your subject is out of focus, that will definitely ruin a photo. You can't really fix misfocused photos in post. Even though there are a bunch of pre-configured white balance settings, you cannot put in the exact kelvins. Next, the camera turns off after 30 seconds of inactivity. It does warn you 10 seconds ahead of time before actually turning off, and you can tap the screen to buy you another 30 seconds. There is no way to turn this off, so this is kind of annoying. For both the front and rear cameras, I do see soft snap come up when I'm taking a picture, and I don't know exactly what this is. Is this something that smoothed out the skin? But there's an option for that to disable the skin smoothing effect, which I personally don't want. I just want a picture to look more natural. There are some other effects that you can apply, such as eye enlargement and controlling how skinny your face looks, but again, I don't use these features. I just want the picture straight up from the camera. When you're shooting in RAW and JPEG, you cannot use the micro SD card, and the app doesn't tell you this. Also, when you're shooting RAW only, you must pre-select the 4:3 aspect ratio, which utilizes the whole sensor. So this makes sense, except it doesn't switch it for you. You must switch it ahead of time unless you're shooting in RAW and JPEG at the same time. Then it will respect the aspect ratio for the JPEG and then keep the 4:3 aspect ratio for the RAW image. And another thing I noted is that if you have the free version of Capture One for Sony, that can read the RAW images from, let's say, my A7 III, but it won't read the DNG files from the Xperia 5 II. For that, you'll need another program like Raw Therapy, which is what I personally used. Here are some pros of Cinema Pro. Cinema Pro is the specialized video recording app that allows you to manually configure your video settings while taking 21:9 aspect ratio video utilizing the H.265 format. Like the Photo Pro app, it comes with a phone, it's free, has no ads, and you don't need to purchase any additional features to maximize its capabilities. You can select a bunch of options such as shutter speed, ISO, and white balance. The Cinema Pro app also groups all your video clips together into different projects so that all your footage will be organized and easy to find. For focusing, you can have pre-configured A and B points for rack focusing, and this is amazing because you can have the camera slowly shift your focus for a more professional look. As a matter of fact, I kinda wish my Sony A7 III would have this feature built in. But for the Sony Xperia 5 II, I think a lot of times you won't get enough shallow depth of field to really take advantage of focus racking. Here are some cons on Cinema Pro. You can choose between 2K and 4K resolution, but you're forced to shoot in the extra wide 21:9 aspect ratio. Sure, you can crop, and there's enough resolution to do that if you're, let's say, shooting a 1080p video. You can shoot in 2K and then crop the center of it to get a 16:9 video. But it's really strange that it doesn't allow you to select a 16:9 project. This is not a hardware issue because the standard camera app allows you to record in 16:9. You cannot choose to use H.264 instead of H.265 for videos. You also cannot choose to save videos to a micro SD card like you can in the Photo Pro app and the regular camera app. There's no explanation as to why this is a limitation. 120 frames per second is only available with the main camera, but that seems to be the case with the regular camera app as well. Like the Photo Pro app, you cannot specify the exact kelvins for white balance. You also can't zoom in the preview screen for macro shots in the video, and there's no focus peaking as I mentioned before. This is even more frustrating to use than the Photo Pro app because at least with the Photo Pro app, they give you the ability to digitally zoom in to confirm focus. Just a side note, as much as I complain about focus peaking, I did come across an app called Open Camera that has it, so you can download something from the Google Play Store that has it. One thing I like about Open Camera is that there's no restriction in terms of record time or resolutions that you might find in some of the freemium apps. However, the interface isn't the best, so I feel like this is definitely meant more for the tech-savvy audience since you can customize a lot of things, but it might not have the most user-friendly interface. I'm not quite sure what the autofocus system Cinema Pro uses, but I did not see the eye autofocus feature on the screen while I was using it. But it does seem to measure focusing areas from different parts of the screen. Between the Cinema Pro and the Photo Pro apps, I do feel like the Cinema Pro app does have more room for improvement. One interesting thing I found was that Cinema Pro isn't available when you launch a camera from the lock screen. Only the Photo Pro app is available, even if you're trying to shoot video. If I had to speculate, the Cinema Pro app has to have more access because it has to organize your video clips by projects, and to safely do that, it's probably wanting you to unlock the phone first, but that's just my guess. Let's cover some of the quirks that I found about the physical camera setup. The lenses are not centered along with the short side of the phone. I do like that design because with my previous Samsung phones, it reduces the chances of you accidentally touching the lens with your fingers while you're holding the phone if the lenses are centered along the back, whereas with this design, it's towards the edge of the phone, so you more likely touch the lens by accident, leaving a fingerprint on the lens. Another thing that I found was that the LED is surprisingly weak. I feel that a premium phone shouldn't skimp out on a good LED light. Personally, I use the LED light as a flashlight instead of for a flash for the photos or lighting for video, but either way, I think this should be decently bright given the price of the phone. Here are some other phones I looked at. Again, depending on what your needs are, just ignore the ones that don't affect you. Most of the other phones here either have a notch or a hole punch in the display, so as I've mentioned before, that's kind of hard to get away from. For the Xperia 1 II, it was even more expensive than the Xperia 5 II, and for me personally, I don't need a 4K display. I also believe there's no second SIM card slot if that's something you need. I've also heard that it doesn't have the focus peaking like this phone either. The Samsung Galaxy and Note phones were very nice and scored highly on my list. Some have a micro SD expansion slots while others do not, and some even have 64 megapixel cameras, and that's a lot. But for me, that's not necessary. Also, if you use guest mode for multiple users, I don't know if the newer phones support that or not. For the Pixel 5, it's water resistant unlike the Pixel 4a, so that's definitely a plus there. But there's no headphone jack nor a micro SD card slot. What's appealing about the Pixel is that they get the latest and greatest OS features that Android has to offer since Google usually updates them first. It's also the cheapest out of the three at $700. In terms of other phones I want to quickly mention, I did take a look at the Pixel 4a, but as I said, that's not water resistant. If you're disinfecting a phone or if you spill anything on it, having a water resistant phone is very useful in my opinion, so for me, that's a must. I also tried to look at gaming phones just to open up my options. The one from Asus isn't waterproof and it seems to focus more on cooling, and I don't need all the RGB-ness that comes from a gaming phone, nor do I need a bulky cooling system. My wife has an iPhone XR, but for me, I wanted to stay with Android. I know a bunch of people who are heavily invested in iOS, and I know a bunch of people who are heavily invested in Android. I'm not trying to steer you one way or another, I'm just trying to present to you my experience for using this one phone for a month, so definitely choose what works for you. In conclusion, do I recommend this phone? Sadly, I'd have to say no with a little asterisk because I feel like Sony has space to improve on the software side. Some of that I feel like you can take care of with the software update, and a bunch of vendors do that. But in terms of the product, I feel like it's not really a $950 phone, or doesn't quite measure up to a $950 phone. And as I said, that plays into the premium phone space. And for me, when I bought it in December of 2020, Sony did have a promotion where you can get $180 back in terms of gift cards and prepaid cards. So I guess it's not as bad. Instead of a $950 phone, I feel like it's more like a $600 phone-ish, give or take. And not only that, right? New phones come out all the time. And honestly, by the time I roll this video out to YouTube, this is probably partially outdated, right? When I was making this video, the Samsung Galaxy S20 was out, and now the S21 is rolling out, and who knows what else is kind of down the pipeline for other vendors. Well, that's it for today's video. If you're phone shopping as well and you're looking for some of the same features, let me know in the comments below. Hopefully this video gave you some insight around that. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.